Someone actually asked that I take a look at the new child tax credit, the expansion of it, and address this talking point that it's going to reduce child poverty by 25%. And this is called the child tax credit, but as I like to call it, I call it a birth control tax because if you decide to have kids, the government will now promise to reduce your tax burden. But if you use birth control to avoid having kids, now you're going to have to pay more in taxes. Birth control tax. Punishment for not procreating. But this is all done because, hey, families, I guess, are more important than bachelors in a society. And I have mixed feelings on this because you could say that my overall opinion on tax incentives like tax credits and write-offs is that most of them are ultimately a form of fascism. They reward and incentivize certain behavior at the threat of taking more of your money. I know a lot of free market advocates and fiscal people, fiscal hawks, are always saying, yeah, but the government is taking less of your money, so isn't that the moral thing to do? And my opinion is, if this is really going to reduce childhood poverty, if these tax cuts are so good, then why not reduce taxes across the board?
That's a really good question.
Why just stop at children? What if you're a bachelor? What if you're a single person? What if you're a married couple and you don't have kids? Some married couples just choose to not have kids. And you want to save money to maybe open a business, maybe go back to school, maybe buy a new car, maybe buy a new house. I guess the SALT deduction may apply to housing, depending on which state you live in. Or maybe you just want to put money away to go on a nice vacation, whatever it is. But the government is still taking more of your money because, hey, you're not having kids, so why should you get to keep more of your money? But it's weird because I think the new expansion gets into the realm of wealth redistribution, as you can see right here. According to this piece from the Brookings Institute, how could expanded tax credits reduce child poverty? This is from July 2016 of this year. And it says the way it worked, if a family had less than $25,000 a year in earnings, they got nothing. If they had somewhat more than $2,500, it phased in very slowly. So to give an example, if you made $400,000 a year, you'd get $2,000 per child. If you may have been unemployed a bunch of the year and part-time in the rest, and made $4,000, you got about $112 per kid. What the American Rescue Plan did is it made two fundamental changes to the tax credit. It raised the credit from $2,000 to $3,000 for children between 6 and 17, making the 17-year-olds eligible for the first time. And then it raised it from $2,000 to $3,600 for kids under 6. That's part one of what it did, increase the amount per kid. Secondly, and this is the really transformative part, it got rid of the multiple restrictions on low-income families at the bottom, and the principle was that that the children in the poorest families, just like children in middle income and children in families making, several $100,000s a year, the children in the bottom would now be fully eligible. So now it looks like you're going to have a situation where people who have a very low tax burden, they're going to get more money from the government than they would pay in taxes. So now it went from being a tax incentive, a tax write-off, now it's getting into the realm of wealth redistribution. So there's a lot being made about whether or not this is going to truly reduce childhood poverty. And my guess is that it might, first off, I guess it's only in effect for this year. But then you have to ask yourself, where's the government going to get all this money to give to the families who are not making enough in taxes to justify the credit? Because government does not have money to give people, meaning the government, it will have to force someone else to lift you out of poverty, or they will impose other taxes on you in other areas of the economy, hoping that you won't notice, or they'll borrow the money, which will hurt the long-term economic growth, which will hurt you long-term, or they will print the money, which will devalue the money that they're sending you in the first place. So does this reduce child poverty? Maybe in the short term, on a superficial level, it does. I would say think about it like getting a new credit card with a $10,000 limit. Suddenly you have $10,000 to spend, but you know that money is not just free money. If you spend it now, you'll have to pay it back with interest, meaning you're depriving yourself of future money. And if you default on it, you ruin your future ability to borrow money that you may wish to borrow in the future while leaving someone else, in this case the credit card company, with the bill. So maybe in the short term it may help reduce poverty, but once you accept this premise that it's okay for government to reduce poverty, that's what you should really be asking here. Is it the government's role to reduce poverty in the first place? Because once you accept this premise, you essentially are giving a government a blank check to take as much of your money, as much of your effort, as much as your time, as much as your labor as they see fit and dictate the terms of the market through price controls, nationalizing healthcare, taking over schools, regulations on certain goods and services that they think might increase poverty. Because, hey, they're trying to reduce poverty, folks. And if you notice, it's never enough. Government has taken on the responsibility of trying to reduce poverty since really the progressive era, so about 100, 120 years. If you look at public education, advocates of public education started by saying, look, let's just make sure everyone has their basic arithmetic, basic science, basic reading and writing. Let's just make sure everyone gets the basics out of the way so that people will be able to take care of themselves in adulthood. Might make them more employable on the job market. And so if I'm recalling correctly, from my understanding, public education was mainly K through 8 at first, and then slowly high school became a guarantee. And then as I've noted in many of my videos, public education spending has increased dramatically over the last 4 to 5 decades, especially in these large cities that are riddled with poverty. They spend way more than the national average on education. And you would think that schools in cities like Chicago, Atlanta, DC, Milwaukee, Baltimore, you'd think these schools would be the envy of the world. And they're not. On top of that, the government started subsidizing and securing student loans in an attempt to make college more affordable. And how is that working out, you guys? And now we're at a point where people are saying, look, we already have K through 12 guaranteed. Let's bring college education into the realm of public education. Let's wipe out student loan debt because this might reduce poverty for a lot of people. Look at healthcare and health insurance. Started out as tax credits to employers, so to offer insurance benefits to their employees. Sounded great at first. More Americans got health insurance. Then eventually these workers, if they retired or they lost their job or tried to switch jobs, they might lose their health insurance. It also stimulated demand in healthcare, which drove up costs. And then to make up for this, the government stepped in with Medicare and Medicaid because, hey, let's make sure the elderly, the retirees, and the poorest of the poor, let's make sure they all have their basic healthcare needs taken care of. Which, again, also drove up costs for non-recipients, especially those without health insurance, because Medicare and Medicaid further stimulated demand in a market where it's hard to increase supply. Hospitals and clinics were also forced to accept Medicare patients at discounts via price controls, losses that were passed on to consumers, other consumers. Look at housing. As I talked about in my GameStonk video and other videos, government tried to make housing more affordable. Many have said that public opinion on bankers and finance took a turn following the 2008 financial crisis, when the housing market crashed, causing a variety of large banks and investment firms to go bankrupt. There's definitely truth to this, but it ignores the fact that, again, bankers and big business have been the target of scrutiny long before 2008. What's also ignored is the fact that the crisis started with government intervention in housing and banking, worsened by politicians' attempts to deliberately increase homeownership in the United States, using whatever regulatory means at their disposal to accomplish this mission, thus creating an unsustainable housing bubble.
The 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, you write, quote, President George W. Bush joined the push for more home ownership, close quote.
Yes.
How come?
He wanted the federal government, particularly the Federal Housing Administration, to make loans so that people could buy a house without a down payment. He thought a down payment was just one of those fussy things that the market had come up with.
And so here are some of the ways to address the issue. First, the single greatest barrier to first-time home ownership is a high down payment.
Oh, SpaghettiOs!
Well, at least he had good intentions. Maybe this is why politicians and government officials don't get dragged as hard as banks for the financial crisis. Because, after all, politicians are acting in the public interest. Nobody would intentionally destroy in the name of the so-called public interest. Just an honest mistake, you guys. Banks and hedge funds, on the other hand, well, they're just in it for money and greed. I mean, we're always told that bankers and big business are evil scum, so why not throw them under the bus when things go wrong? How dare banks and investment firms follow the orders and encouragement of central planners and regulators in Washington?
First of all, government-sponsored corporations that help create our mortgage system. I introduced two of the leaders here today. They call those people Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as well as the federal home loan banks, will increase their commitment to minority markets by more than $440 billion.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
This was at the compassionate part of compassionate conservatism.
You see, these well-intentioned politicians are motivated by compassion, whereas bankers are motivated by making money. I guess everyone who has ever wanted to make money is a terrible person. Both the Clinton and Bush administrations tried to reduce interest rates. They increased subsidies for low-income housing. They got rid of things like those pesky down payments. And for a minute, some people who were not able to afford to buy a house, suddenly they had the means to buy a house. So you could say in the short term, on a superficial level, a lot of people were rising out of poverty because they were able to buy homes for the first time. This stimulated demand, it created a housing bubble, which eventually crashed the economy, but hey, for the short run, you could say it reduced poverty. So this is the child tax credit. It's being presented as a tax credit, which is a total package deal, considering that people are going to be getting more than what they would have paid in taxes. And if it's not entirely a tax credit, we should ask why it's right for the government to take money from some people and give it to others. And people would probably invoke, things like altruism, at which point you know where the real battle is. The code of ethics that preaches sacrifice for the sake of others motivates people to justify using things like the threat of guns, the threat of prison, the threat of force against people who are not willing to sacrifice for the less fortunate. Then you got to ask yourself how much wealth and prosperity will be enjoyed in a society that fully embraces this code of ethics.
Really makes you think.